Hello, so this is your short presentation on person-centered practice. So I'm going to start by introducing the roots. So starting off with humanistic psychology. So humanistic psychology is a perspective that emphasizes looking at the whole person and the uniqueness of each individual. So it begins with an existential assumption that people have free will and are motivated to achieve their potential and to self-actualize. So now I'm going to move on just to look at Maslow, who is fundamental to the development of humanistic psychology. So this is Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and this visually represents some key ideas from Maslow, that every person is born with a set of basic needs. So starting at the bottom, you'll see physiological needs, breathing, water, food, shelter, clothing and sleep. And above that, safety and security. And Maslow believed that these were kind of building blocks, so you needed to have the lower level needs met in order to meet the higher level needs, with the top being this idea of self-actualization, which is really about an individual having acceptance, purpose, meaning, and realizing their inner potential. So this is Carl Rogers, and Carl Rogers was the other pioneer really of person-centered approaches. Carl Rogers was born in 1902. His family were very religious and conservative and valued hard work. Carl himself was fascinated by nature and the natural sciences, but gradually his interest in people grew and he decided to study clinical psychology. As he grew, his views became more liberal, and this shift was not well received by his parents, but he felt that it really was him and what he wanted and how he wanted to be. So he was kind of gradually cutting himself free of what his parents had wanted, and this was quite important to some of his ideas. He identified that much of his childhood, his sense of self-worth had been dependent on what his parents had valued, and he felt that if he was going to become truly fulfilled, he had to kind of break free of that and overcome the feeling that his worth was conditional on what his parents wanted. So in the humanistic model, the belief is that babies know what they need, but they require others to provide for them. And this attention, love, regard, caring can be given in two ways: unconditional or conditional. Unconditional regard is created when the primary caregiver is devoted to nurturing the newborn without expecting something in return. The caregiver seeks to anticipate the baby's needs and provide for them perfectly all the time, 24 hours a day, which of course is pretty much impossible. However devoted the caregiver is, mistakes will be made and the baby's needs will not be met. This will be experienced as a difficult thing for the child, because up until this point it's lived in a highly protected environment, and then suddenly it might experience hunger or boredom without it being satisfied immediately. It may be at this point that the child realizes that it is not part of another person, but is actually a separate being. Within this, the child starts to develop a concept of self, described as the self-concept. So in some respects it's a good job that caregivers make these mistakes, because without them we would never achieve any sense of autonomy or self. So the need for positive regard is an important idea for Rogers, and self-regard is the internalisation of the positive regard that an individual experiences. So the internalisation is when you absorb something. So if you hear positive regard as a child, you know, you're a good person, you're okay, you are going to internalise that, and that contributes to feelings of self-worth and self-esteem. So ideas around unconditional value and unconditional regard are important to the positive development of someone's self-worth. But what Carl Rogers found was that individuals often experience conditions of worth. So this is when individuals have messages or internalize messages that you're a good person if you behave in a certain way, for example. So a personal example was that one of my conditions of worth growing up was the importance that I was good when I was not burdening other people or bothering other people. So I developed a condition of worth around that I was a good person and got positive approval when I wasn't bothering people. Now, as I grew up and I became more independent, there started to be this incongruence, so this conflict, because I was doing all of this stuff so as not to be a bother to people, but actually I was feeling like that was really, really unfair and that other people weren't doing the same for me. So I also started to notice other people who I respected and valued who didn't behave in that way, who felt that actually it was okay to express their needs, that they could be assertive around that, and that was okay. I still respected them and valued them, and I kind of quite wanted to be like that. So this is where there started to be this conflict within myself around the person who I wanted to be as opposed to the person I had been brought up to be. So what Rogers would say is that by continuing to behave in ways where I wasn't burdening other people, I was behaving inauthentically. That actually my authentic self was to be somebody who would speak up for their own needs and maybe would challenge and be assertive. So this is really important to the person-centered approach, that there's a belief that humans have a wish to grow and discover their true self. So this relates to this idea of self-actualization. Going back to Maslow believed that actually in order to get to the level of self-actualization, those other lower level needs needed to be met as well. So there is this idea of personal and social liberation from those values that we all and beliefs that we all grow up with. And what this meant was that Rogers rejected this professional pursuit of control or authority, that actually as a professional it's my role to define what people should be doing to be better people. What Rogers believed was that actually we need to provide the environment for people to liberate themselves. So this idea of being non-directive is really fundamental to person-centered approaches. So Rogers identified 6 necessary conditions of the therapeutic process. So he believed that if we seek to provide the right environment, the right relationship for the people that we work with, that they will liberate themselves and self-actualize. So the first is that there must be personal or psychological contact between the client and the therapist. The second is that the client must be in a state of incongruence between their concept of self and their experiences. So that's the idea we've just been thinking about, this inauthenticity, that there's some tension or some conflict there. So condition 3 is that the therapist must be congruent, and this is often used interchangeably with the term genuineness. So the therapist must be real, not cover their true feelings or experiences within the contact with the client. The 4th is unconditional positive regard. So this is about experiencing it, feeling it, but also expressing it where you unconditionally accept someone for who they are and what they're experiencing. The fifth is about experiencing accurate empathetic understanding of the client. And we will spend time within the module thinking about empathy. And the final one is about client perception. So this says that it's not just enough for you to experience empathy, but that the client must perceive the conditions of empathy and unconditional positive regard. So it's not okay just for you to feel it. The person you're working with must experience that and feel it as well. Now, Rogers is quite clear that these are ideals, but they can be really challenging to achieve in practice. Okay, so that was your quick whistle-stop tour of person-centered practice. Here are the references that were used for the presentation.